For 3 consecutive nights, the residents of Sandia Street were privy to the faint, distressed sounds emanating from the residence of an elderly woman. Yet they deliberately chose to disregard them. However, on the 3rd night, as the desert chill deepened and the proximity of death felt palpable, a man clad in a white robe emerged into the yard. He seemed to emit a gentle luminescence in the encroaching darkness, and he spoke softly. "Evelyn, I heard your plea." Under the arid expanse of the New Mexico sky in Albuquerque, Sandia Street presented a picture of typical suburban tranquility. Overgrown front yards, weathered mailboxes, and the incessant drone of swamp coolers expelling warm air through cracked window panes. But during that particular week, an ominous atmosphere descended upon the neighborhood, a palpable tension that remained unspoken. A number of neighbors had observed the absence of Evelyn Martinez, the 72-year-old widow residing at number 14, from her customary morning routines. There was no sweeping of her porch, no tending to her wilting rose bushes with the garden hose, no cheerful exchange with Mrs. Hernandez across the fence. Some speculated, perhaps she's visiting her daughter. Others murmured, she's likely just sleeping in. Yet the reality was far more stark and unsettling. Within the confines of that small, turquoise-trimmed house, 4 grown offspring, Robert, Sandra, Michael, and Christine, had convened with a chilling resolve. The same hands that had once gently rocked them to sleep now regarded their mother as an impediment to their aspirations. Their hushed conversations revolved around property valuations, land acquisition, and government disbursements, a vocabulary devoid of any genuine affection. When Evelyn steadfastly refused to relinquish the home she and her late husband had painstakingly built, the atmosphere within the house grew heavy. Moments later, this woman, who had once lovingly braided her daughter's hair and soothed scraped knees, found herself being forcibly dragged through the back entrance. The worn wooden steps protested loudly as Robert and Michael hauled her across the yard. Sandra stood by the doorway, her face a mask of unyielding determination. Christine averted her gaze, visibly trembling, yet she remained present. The cord they employed was robust, designed for securing substantial loads, not for restraining a human being. They fastened it around a sturdy wooden support beam, looped it around Evelyn's torso, and pulled with such force that she cried out in pain. A dish towel was thrust into her mouth, stifling her panicked sounds. The neighbors heard something, enough to spark a fleeting concern, but never enough to compel an act of intervention, a dull thud, a muffled cry, the grating sound of rope against wood. Each time an individual paused, apprehension prevailed. "It's a family matter," they would rationalize, retreating behind the anonymity of their drawn curtains. Dusk settled swiftly over the desert landscape. The wind whispered through the yard, its tendrils brushing against Evelyn's frail form, which was upright and bound beneath the shadows of the porch. Her breaths were short, ragged with fear. Her fingers grew numb, her vision wavered. Yet, even through the gag, her heart offered a silent, ingrained prayer from her childhood. "Lord Jesus, please don't forget me." She believed herself utterly alone, unheard. Unbeknownst to her, however, divine intervention was already in motion. On Sandia Street, the ordinary fabric of existence was irrevocably altered. The sequence of events that led to Evelyn Martinez being bound to a wooden post did not originate in that backyard. Its roots lay decades earlier, in a time when love was uncomplicated, when her 4 children were small enough to be cradled in her arms and soothed with warm tortillas fresh from the griddle. In those bygone days, the Martinez household in Albuquerque was a hub of joy and laughter. Evelyn and her husband, Jose, toiled tirelessly to instill a sense of dignity in their children. Jose endured long hours working on construction crews, repairing highways, often returning home with dust clinging to his hair and his hands roughened by hard labor. Yet he always greeted his family with a smile. Evelyn took on domestic work in the more affluent districts, diligently saving every dollar, ensuring her children never experienced the sting of poverty, even when financial resources were scarce. However, time possesses a relentless quality, gradually eroding even the most resilient foundations. Jose's sudden demise in a construction accident left Evelyn a widow at the age of 58. The insurance payout barely covered the funeral expenses. Her children, now adults forging their own paths, offered assurances of more frequent visits, greater assistance, and increased communication. Initially, they upheld these promises, but gradually their calls became shorter, their visits less frequent, and their affections seemed to wane. Years passed, and adversity subtly reshaped each of them. Robert, the eldest, once a promising high school athlete, had traded his athletic ambitions for a life clouded by alcohol and rationalizations. Sandra's marital misfortunes left her embittered, harboring a conviction that the world was indebted to her. Michael, possessing a degree in accounting, evolved into a person of cold, calculating disposition, one who assessed every situation in terms of monetary value, including his mother's worth. Christine, the youngest, drifted through life, seeking validation from anyone who offered it, even if it meant conforming to her siblings' increasingly bleak outlook. The pivotal moment arrived with the delivery of an official government notification. It conveyed the impending large-scale highway expansion project that would bisect the very block where Evelyn resided. Properties in the vicinity were anticipated to experience a dramatic surge in value. Developers were discreetly extending offers for property acquisition before the market reached its zenith. Michael was the first to recognize the financial implications. He meticulously analyzed the figures, examined zoning modifications, and studied property market trends. His conclusion was straightforward. Their mother's home represented a significant financial windfall. Robert readily concurred. Sandra perceived it as an opportunity for a fresh start. Christine expressed reservations, but the fear of exclusion ultimately outweighed her moral qualms. Their discussions shifted from casual conversation to clandestine plotting. They communicated through group chats, convened in quiet diners, and whispered about legal documentation and strategies for managing their mother. Initially, their approach was subtle, suggesting Evelyn sell her home and reside with Sandra. However, Evelyn refused, finding solace in the lingering presence of Jose within the familiar walls of her home. The siblings grew increasingly impatient. The house was no longer merely a dwelling, it was their perceived escape from their own personal failures. Michael advanced the notion that their mother's cognitive faculties were deteriorating. If she refuses to sign willingly, he reasoned, the law permits us to assume control if she is deemed incompetent. Sandra, her voice sharpened by resentment, nodded in agreement. Our father didn't labor his entire life for her to squander this inheritance. Robert offered no justification, merely expressing his desire for immediate cash. Christine, torn between right and wrong, hesitantly asked, "What if she despises us for this?" Michael's response was chillingly pragmatic. "She'll understand when she's in a secure environment. Besides, she's elderly. What real recourse does she have?" That was the precipice. The line was crossed not in the backyard, nor by the ropes, but within their hearts, long before any physical contact was made. The betrayal of a parent does not commence with aggression. It begins with the quiet, deliberate decision to cease perceiving them as such. The early morning sunlight streamed through the gauzy curtains of Evelyn's modest kitchen, casting elongated shadows across the worn linoleum floor. She had awakened at her usual hour, 5 o'clock in the morning. Her joints ached with the familiar sting of arthritis, but her heart remained steady as she prepared her cinnamon coffee and gently warmed a tortilla on the stove. Her plan was to visit the market for tomatoes and perhaps stop by the church's thrift store afterward. However, upon entering the living room, a sudden gasp escaped her lips. All 4 of her children were gathered, awaiting her. Robert was sprawled languidly on the sofa, his large frame occupying most of the space, his eyes already betraying irritation. Sandra sat rigidly, her arms crossed, her lips pursed, as if she had rehearsed this confrontation extensively. Michael held a manila folder on his lap, tapping it rhythmically with a pen, exuding an air of calculated preparedness. Christine, meanwhile, hovered near the window, deliberately avoiding eye contact, shifting her weight with nervous energy. Evelyn immediately sensed that something was amiss. An instinctive premonition whispered, "This is not a social visit. It is an ambush." Michael broke the silence, clearing his throat as if initiating a formal business meeting. "Mom, please sit. We need to discuss something." His tone was not a suggestion, but a directive. Evelyn slowly lowered herself onto a dining chair, her hands exhibiting a slight tremor. "What is this about?" Sandra leaned forward, her voice laced with impatience. "We're concerned about you, the house, and your responsibilities. We don't believe you're capable of managing everything anymore." Evelyn blinked, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. "I cook, I clean, I shop, I take care of myself. What do you mean I'm not capable?" Robert scoffed dismissively. "Mom, please stop pretending. You're forgetful. You move slowly. You've had, what, 3 falls this year?" "Only 1, Evelyn corrected softly. "And that was only because the rug slipped." Michael opened the folder and slid a stack of documents across the table. "Mom, the highway expansion is proceeding. The value of your property is going to increase significantly. If we act promptly, we can sell it before the market is saturated. However, the house must be legally transferred into our names." Evelyn gazed at the papers, her fingers not reaching for them. "You want me to sign the house over to you?" "We want to help you," Sandra interjected sharply. "This is for your own good." A prolonged silence followed, broken only by the incessant ticking of the wall clock. Evelyn surveyed each of her children, truly seeing not the offspring she had nurtured, but adults hardened by disappointment, avarice, and apprehension. She pushed the documents back towards Michael. "I am not signing." Michael's jaw tightened. "Mom, don't make this more difficult." Evelyn lifted her chin, her voice trembling but resolute. "This house is all that remains of your father. We built this home together. I brought each of you through that door as newborns. I will not surrender it as if it signifies nothing." Robert stood, his imposing figure casting a shadow over her. "You don't have a choice." Evelyn met his gaze unflinchingly. "I always have a choice, and my answer is no." Christine finally broke under the pressure, her voice barely audible. "Mom, please don't force us into taking drastic measures." Evelyn's heart fractured at the palpable fear in her daughter's eyes. "Drastic measures?" she repeated softly. "Threatening your own mother?" The siblings exchanged a furtive glance, a silent, grim understanding passing between them. In that moment, the destiny of Evelyn Martinez was sealed. Not because she refused to sign, but because they recognized she would never voluntarily relinquish the home forged from love. And they were prepared to seize it by force. The breaking point arrived with startling swiftness, far sooner than Evelyn could have anticipated. One moment she was standing in her living room, steadfastly refusing to surrender the house built with her husband's diligent efforts, and the next, rough hands seized her arms. Robert was the first to grab her, his fingers digging painfully into her upper arms as he dragged her toward the rear exit. Michael followed closely, carrying a spool of thick nylon rope, typically used for securing heavy moving crates. Sandra held the door ajar, her jaw set, her eyes devoid of warmth. Christine trailed behind, visibly shaking, murmuring, "Just do it quickly. Please, let's just get this over with." The weathered wooden steps creaked under their combined weight as they propelled Evelyn onto the patio. A sudden gust of desert wind whipped across her face, carrying the dry, dusty aroma of summer sand and creosote. She stumbled, nearly collapsing, but Robert maintained his unyielding grip. "Stop!" Evelyn cried, her voice laced with fear. "What are you doing?" "No more discussion," Robert snapped. "You brought this upon yourself." Michael spoke without looking at her, as if distancing himself from the cruelty facilitated the act. "She's making irrational decisions. This is for her safety." It was a blatant falsehood delivered with a businesslike demeanor. The rear porch beam, aged, splintered, and sun-bleached, became the site of her profound humiliation. They pressed her against it as the first loop of rope encircled her waist. Michael tightened it. It was too tight. Evelyn gasped, the air forcibly expelled from her lungs. "Please, don't do this. I am your mother." For a fleeting instant, Christine faltered. Her eyes welled with tears as she witnessed the rope constricting Evelyn's slender frame. "Perhaps we should reconsider." Sandra cut her off abruptly. "No. If she isn't going to cooperate, this is the only recourse." They continued to wrap the rope around her chest, her arms, and her wrists. Each subsequent loop seemed to diminish another fragment of her dignity. Her cries did not go unheard. They carried beyond the wooden fence and into the adjacent yards. On one side, Mrs. Hernandez, a kind woman in her 60s, paused her mopping upon hearing the muffled shouts. She stepped onto her porch, peering over the fence, and caught a fleeting glimpse of movement, Evelyn's silhouette being bound to the beam. "Evelyn, is everything all right?" Sandra approached the fence, a practiced smile on her face. "Oh, hello. She's fine. The doctor said she's experiencing episodes. We're ensuring she remains safe until assistance arrives." Mrs. Hernandez hesitated. Something in Evelyn's eyes appeared too lucid, too filled with terror. Yet a creeping fear took hold. Fear of being mistaken. Fear of intruding upon family matters. Fear of confrontation. Consequently, she retreated into her house, drawing the blinds and increasing the television volume. On the other side, Mr. Raymond Cole also heard the commotion. The thud, the tightening of the rope, the faint cry that was abruptly cut short. He walked into his yard, prepared to shout, ready to intervene, but stopped. Years of habitually minding his own affairs held him back. "Don't get involved," he muttered to himself, returning indoors with a heavy heart. Under the fading sky, Evelyn stood tethered to the post as the air cooled and the sun descended behind the Sandia Mountains. The rope chafed her skin, her legs trembled, and her mouth tasted of fear and dust. Night encroached upon the yard. Crickets began their nocturnal serenade. Her children switched off the porch lights and retreated indoors. And Evelyn, trapped in the darkness, whispered through the cloth Sandra had forced into her mouth, "Dear Lord, please don't leave me here alone." But the desert night offered no solace, only an enveloping silence. The dawn did not arrive gently. It descended like a searing torch. By the time the initial rays of New Mexico sunlight pierced the rooftops of Sandia Street, Evelyn's body was already racked with tremors from the cold and exhaustion. She had managed little to no sleep, shivering through the night, her slumber a series of shallow, anxious dreams. However, the moment daylight touched her face, the sensation of cold was supplanted by a new agony: heat. The desert sun ascended with ruthless speed, transforming the backyard into a mirror of the very place Evelyn dreaded she might soon encounter: arid, blistering, and unforgiving. Her skin began to burn almost immediately. The rope dug deeper into her arms, which were now swollen and stiff. Her lips cracked, bleeding at the edges. Inside the house, the air conditioner hummed softly. Her children moved about their daily routines nonchalantly, showering, eating cereal, scrolling through their mobile devices, as if the woman bound merely a few feet away were invisible. From the yard, Evelyn could discern the sounds emanating from within: the cheerful banter from a morning talk show, the clinking of a spoon against a ceramic bowl, the distant flush of a toilet. Life continued its course. Her own was rapidly ebbing away. Around midday, her perception of the world began to blur. Initially, the oppressive heat induced dizziness. Then vivid visions began to manifest. She saw José, her departed husband, standing beneath the small apple tree they had planted together in the 1980s. He was not aged, as he was at the time of his passing, but appeared youthful again, his smile reminiscent of the one he wore when returning home from late-night work shifts. His voice was soft, a soothing balm. Awaken, just a little longer. But with a blink, he vanished into the shimmering haze. The hallucinations flickered in and out of existence, like passing clouds, interspersed with fleeting images of her children as toddlers, her parents, and her late sister holding a Bible. Evelyn attempted to pray, but her thoughts meandered. She whispered fragmented verses: "Hail Mary, full of grace." However, the words caught on her parched tongue. By mid-afternoon, discerning neighbors began to notice that something was amiss. Mr. Raymond Cole, the retired mechanic next door, stepped outside to tend to his tomato plants. He heard a faint groan, barely audible, like a whisper of air. Driven by a mixture of curiosity and unease, he peered over the fence. For the first time, he saw her clearly. Evelyn, bound like an animal, slumped forward, her skin raw and reddened by the sun. "Good heavens," he murmured, horrified. He marched towards the fence, prepared to call out to the children or even dial emergency services. However, before he could act, Robert abruptly emerged from the back door. "Good afternoon, Ray," he said, his voice disarmingly relaxed. "What's happening here?" "She's unwell," Robert replied calmly. "The doctor advised restraints." Raymond hesitated. He had grown up in this neighborhood, a place where people generally trusted one another. Yet the sight of Evelyn, weakened, bound, and clearly suffering, haunted him. He clenched his jaw. "I should call someone." Robert stepped closer. "If you call anyone, I'll inform them that you've been harassing my mother. You know how that would appear. 4 children corroborating the same account versus a single neighbor." A potent combination of fear and shame silenced Raymond. He slowly backed away, mumbling an apology he didn't genuinely feel. A similar sense of guilt stirred across the fence on the other side. Mrs. Hernandez peeked through her kitchen window several times, her hand pressed against her chest as she observed Evelyn's head lolling forward. She whispered, "My God, forgive me." Then she drew the blinds shut once more. The sun continued its slow descent toward evening, stretching the hours out like a prolonged torment. Evelyn's consciousness flickered in and out. Her head felt heavy, her body numb. And as the sky's hues shifted from a fiery orange to a muted purple, a heartbreaking truth settled over Sandia Street. Everyone had heard her. Everyone had witnessed something, but no one had intervened. Cowardice had become a pervasive affliction within the community, a silent accord to permit suffering to persist as long as it did not directly affect them. The third day dawned not with a gentle warmth or a promise of solace, but with the stark certainty that something vital within Evelyn Martinez was beginning to shut down. By this point, she no longer registered the burning sensation of the sun or the biting constriction of the ropes. Her body had transcended pain, entering a state of cold, surreal numbness. Her lips had taken on a dark, purplish hue. Her skin, once soft with age, now bore a grayish tint. Dehydration was no longer a looming threat, but a stark, rapidly advancing reality. Her head hung forward, resting against her chest. Her breaths were shallow, barely causing her ribcage to rise. Internally, her mind ebbed and flowed like waves receding from a dying shore. From the kitchen window, Christine watched, her hands trembling. "Mom looks different," she whispered. Sandra brushed past without glancing. "She's just being stubborn. She'll sign eventually." Yet even Sandra's voice held a subtle tremor. She couldn't completely ignore it. Robert studiously avoided the window, pacing the living room, his guilt masked by anger. "She's fine," he muttered to himself. "She's strong. She'll be all right." Michael sat at the dining table, his gaze fixed on the real estate documents he had once handled with unwavering precision. Now his hands shook as he touched them. He couldn't erase the faint memory of his mother patiently teaching him multiplication at that very table, her hand guiding his pencil, her voice gentle and encouraging. Despite the inner turmoil, none of them opened the door. Outside, the desert sun rose once more, brilliant and merciless, almost triumphant. It illuminated Evelyn's frail figure, highlighting the bruises on her arms and the dried streaks of tears on her cheeks. Her thoughts drifted further. First came the spectral images. Jose smiling, reaching for her. Her children as little ones, calling out "Mama." Her sister lighting a candle in church. And behind them, a soft radiance she couldn't quite comprehend. Then a memory resurfaced, one she hadn't accessed in decades. Her grandmother's voice praying over her at bedtime. "Jesus watches you. Jesus sees you. Jesus never abandons you." These simple, ancient words resonated deeply within her heart. For the first time in years, she uttered a complete prayer. No fragments, no hesitation, only profound sincerity. "Lord Jesus, I offer my suffering to you. If this is my appointed time, receive me. But if you still see me, if you still know my name, have mercy on me, my Savior." Her knees buckled slightly beneath the taut ropes. Her vision narrowed, focusing on a receding tunnel of light. Darkness encroached from the periphery, soft and strangely comforting. Inside the house, the siblings engaged in hushed, tense arguments. A sense of profound wrongness pervaded the atmosphere. "Shouldn't we check on her?" Christine implored. "No," Michael snapped, his voice betraying more fear than conviction. "We're too far into this now." But outside, the yard grew unnervingly still. Silent, heavy with an unspoken dread. Evelyn lifted her eyes one last time. She could barely discern the sky through the blurred haze, but she whispered nonetheless, "Jesus, if you are near, please don't let me die alone." Her head fell forward. Her final breath trembled. And at that precise instant, the desert wind ceased its movement. The air shifted, charged with an ethereal presence, a sense of holy anticipation. Heaven was attentive, listening. Near midnight, the desert air grew unnaturally still. It was so quiet that even the usual hum of insects fell silent. The usually bustling Sandia Street, a corridor accustomed to the faint barks of dogs or the rumble of passing vehicles, was suddenly enveloped in a profound quietude, a silence so absolute it felt as if the entire world had paused its breath. In the secluded expanse of the Martinez family's backyard, Evelyn remained suspended, her form slack against the binding ropes, her head listing to one side, her respiration so shallow it was barely discernible. The moonlight, a cool, ethereal caress, cascaded over her, outlining the contours of a being on the precipice of surrender. Then, a transformation began. A subtle luminescence materialized at the yard's furthest edge. Initially, it was so faint, one might have mistaken it for the distant beams of passing automobiles. However, headlights do not possess the ability to hover, nor do they intensify with the rhythmic pulse of a heartbeat. The glow expanded, migrating from a pure white to a serene cerulean hue, casting its radiance upon the parched earth below. The atmosphere grew perceptibly warmer, resonating with an unearthly vibration, a phenomenon beyond the explanations of wind or electrical current. Within the confines of the dwelling, Christine found herself seated on the sofa, her wakefulness underscored by a gnawing sense of guilt. An intuition, deeper than any primal fear, stirred within her. Rising, she cautiously approached the window, peering through the blinds, her breath catching in her throat. "Someone's out there," she murmured. But as she blinked, the luminescence softened, as if receding from her gaze. Back in the yard, the light intensified, giving way to a slowly emerging silhouette, an apparition that moved with a sense of reverence, as if stepping through a portal separating realms. Bare feet met the soil without disturbing a single particle of dust. A white garment, both simple and impossibly luminous, stirred gently in the night air. A mantle of a soft, earth-toned hue was draped loosely about his shoulders. His hair, slightly tousled, cascaded to his collarbones, catching the moon's reflection, and his countenance, marked by a serenity, a profound empathy, and a sorrow only a heart that had borne witness to the entirety of human suffering could possess, turned towards Evelyn. It was Jesus Christ himself. Evelyn stirred, her eyelids fluttering as she struggled to comprehend the figure before her. She pondered if this was the passage into death, if her final earthly vision was intended as a solace as she transitioned. Yet, as the man drew nearer, his gaze met hers. These were not the eyes of a phantom or a mind succumbing to delusion. They were tangible, profoundly dark, and imbued with a love she had never encountered in any mortal being. "Evelyn," he whispered, his voice a gentle yet potent force that resonated through her very core. "I heard you." Her breath escaped in a shuddering sigh. A single tear traced a path down her weathered cheek. She attempted to articulate her questions, to inquire of his identity, but he delicately cupped her face. "No more fear, daughter. You are not alone." He examined the bindings encircling her wrists. His fingers brushed against the fibers, and they unraveled instantly, cleanly, falling to the ground as if severed by an edge far keener than any human artifice could forge. Evelyn gasped as circulation returned to her extremities. She winced at the accompanying discomfort, but his presence offered a soothing balm, akin to cool water on a burn. With astonishing gentleness, Jesus lifted her as if she were weightless, and lowered her to the soft earth beneath the apple tree, supporting her head with his hand. From within the folds of his robe, he produced a small, worn water skin, offering it to her lips. "Slowly," he instructed. She drank, and the water tasted like nothing she had ever experienced, vibrantly alive. Why did you come?" she whispered. Jesus' gaze drifted towards the house, towards the slumbering children within, oblivious to the divine reckoning unfolding mere steps away. "Because cries of suffering ascend to heaven," he stated softly. "And heaven invariably responds, particularly when the world averts its eyes." He draped his crimson mantle, warm and soft as a living pulse, over her trembling form. "Rest now, Evelyn," he murmured. "Tomorrow, truth will emerge with the dawn." And for the first time in 3 days, Evelyn closed her eyes, not in fear or pain, but in a profound sense of peace, embraced by the presence of the one who never forsakes the forgotten. The dawn ascended over Albuquerque, a gradual unveiling, painting Sandia Street with strokes of pale gold. Yet, within the Martinez residence, the morning's arrival was heralded by a shock that would forever be etched in the memories of Evelyn's children. Robert was the first to descend the stairs, his eyes still heavy with sleep, preparing for the familiar ritual of pouring cereal, when he froze midway into the kitchen. His mother, who should have been bound to the porch post, was standing at the sink, her hands, though trembling, holding a glass of water with the unmistakable signs of life. The color drained from his countenance. "Mom, how are you inside?" Evelyn offered no verbal reply. She simply met his gaze with an expression devoid of anger or malice, radiating only truth. Sandra followed swiftly, then Michael, clutching his manila folder, and Christine, her face ashen and her body quivering. The four clustered together like children caught in a deception too vast to conceal. "This is impossible," Michael stammered. "The ropes, those knots, they couldn't just—" His words faltered as the room seemed to warp. A beam of warm, blue-white light streamed through the kitchen doorway, not blinding, but possessing a power that silenced every held breath. The very air grew dense, as if the entire structure acknowledged the presence that had entered. Jesus Christ stood in the doorway, not with the clamor of thunder or ostentatious display, but with an aura of such commanding authority that the walls themselves appeared to incline. His robe still bore a faint shimmer from the preceding night. His eyes held the immeasurable depth of oceans and the profound sorrow of a father who has witnessed his creation's self-inflicted ruin. The four siblings instinctively recoiled, forming a line against the far wall. Who are you?" Robert managed, his voice choked, though a profound certainty resonated within him. Jesus stepped into the center of the kitchen. Each movement was measured, deliberate, infused with compassion, yet underscored by an edge of righteous resolve. "I am the one who was with your mother when you abandoned her," he stated softly. "The one who heeded her prayers while you disregarded her pleas." The words, delivered with the gentleness of silk, struck with the force of thunder. Sandra's knees buckled, and she grasped the counter for support. Christine covered her mouth, her sobs silent. Michael's grip tightened on his folder, crumpling the papers within. Jesus' gaze shifted to each of them in turn. "To you, Robert," his voice tightened, not with wrath, but with agonizing clarity. She offered strength when you were feeble, and you repaid her with cruelty. Robert shuddered violently, tears welling. I didn't mean to hurt her. To Sandra, he continued. She extended loyalty when your union fractured, and you perverted that loyalty into a sense of entitlement. Sandra's composure crumbled. Please, please stop. To Michael, his look intensified. She provided an education she could scarcely afford, and you exploited that knowledge to orchestrate her demise. Michael dropped the folder, gasping for air. And you, Christine. His voice softened, yet his eyes penetrated her soul. Your apprehension led you to embrace wrongdoing rather than safeguarding the one who cherished you most. Christine sank to her knees. I'm sorry. I'm so incredibly sorry. Then Jesus raised his hand, not in aggression, but in an act of divine retribution. For 3 minutes, he declared, you shall experience a fraction, merely a fraction, of what she endured for 3 days. The instant his hand descended, an unseen force propelled the children to the floor. They cried out, not from physical pain, but from the torment of thirst, terror, betrayal, and desertion. Their mouths grew parched, their wrists burned as if bound, their chests constricted with a suffocating helplessness. Sandra clawed at her throat. Robert sobbed into the tiled floor. Michael trembled uncontrollably. Christine shook, as if simultaneously consumed by frost and flame. Evelyn watched, tears streaming down her face, not out of vindictiveness, but out of profound heartbreak. After precisely 3 minutes, Jesus lowered his hand, and the suffering ceased instantaneously. Gasping for air, the 4 children lay sprawled on the floor, humbled, their very foundations shaken. Jesus regarded them with a sorrow far deeper than any anger. She endured 3 days, he stated quietly. You experienced 3 minutes. Grasp the distinction and choose the beings you will become henceforth. And in that modest New Mexico kitchen, the gravity of heaven's justice lingered, not to annihilate them, but to shatter their defenses, enabling their ultimate transformation. The kitchen floor still vibrated from the recent events. The air carried a faint scent of dust mingled with something warm, reminiscent of church incense after a service. Robert, Sandra, Michael, and Christine lay motionless, their breaths ragged, as if they had traversed miles through the very embodiment of fear. Their hair clung to their foreheads, their hands quivered beyond their control. 3 minutes had stripped them bare, followed by an unnerving silence, broken only by the fragile rhythm of Evelyn's breathing. She stood near the sink, enveloped in the crimson mantle Jesus had bestowed upon her hours prior. It draped over her shoulders like a protective shield, its fabric emitting a soft luminescence, as if still retaining the warmth of his presence. The daylight filtering through the window illuminated her face, weary and bruised, yet undeniably alive. Jesus turned to her, the authority in his expression melting instantly. You have a choice, he informed her. Justice or mercy. The 4 children tensed. Even in their weakened state, they understood the profound implication. Evelyn possessed the power to deliver them to the legal system. Charges of elder abuse, attempted homicide, unlawful confinement, each offense carrying years of incarceration, their futures, their families, their very lives resting in her hands. Evelyn, however, did not immediately respond. She moved slowly towards them, each step accompanied by an ache, yet her resolve remained unbroken. Robert was the first to lift his head, his voice fractured. Mom, I I don't deserve forgiveness." Sandra wiped tears from her swollen eyes. "You should despise us." I would." Michael's gaze remained fixed on the floor, unable to meet her eyes. "I expect no mercy. Just do what you deem necessary." Christine crawled closer, her trembling fingers clutching the hem of Evelyn's garment. "Mom, I don't want to lose you. I don't want to be this person any longer." Evelyn knelt, her exertion evident, yet her determination unyielding, and gently touched Christine's cheek. "You were all my babies once," she whispered. "You learned to walk in this home. You learned to speak here. How did we become strangers?" Her voice faltered on the last word, not from anger, but from a deep well of sorrow. She looked towards Jesus, towards the one who had preserved her life, towards the one who had revealed to her the profound depths of maternal suffering, betrayal, and, most crucially, the ultimate truth of mercy and rebirth. "I choose," her voice trembled, "to forgive." A gasp escaped Michael's lips. Sandra dissolved into sobs. Robert hid his face in his hands. Christine collapsed into Evelyn's lap, weeping openly. Jesus observed them with an expression that blended sorrow and pride, akin to a father witnessing his children take their inaugural steps toward redemption. Evelyn continued softly, her words imbued with a fragile yet firm conviction. "Forgiving does not mean forgetting. It does not erase your actions, but it means I will not permit hatred to dominate my spirit. And I will not subject you to a system that may mete out punishment, but cannot truly heal." She rose, with Christine's assistance, and looked at each of them. "You will depart this house today," she stated gently, yet with a fortitude none had anticipated. "I require space, time, and so do you. When you are prepared to embody the children I raised, not the individuals you have become, you may return." Robert nodded slowly. "I will earn my way back." "Whatever it takes," Sandra whispered. "I will change. I swear I will." Michael wiped his eyes. "I will destroy the papers. Every single one. And I will rectify this somehow." Christine squeezed Evelyn's hand. "I'm starting therapy. I need to mature, for both of us." Jesus stepped closer, his presence once again filling the room. Gentle, sacred, undeniable. "Mercy," he stated softly, "is the initial stride toward transformation." He placed his hand over Evelyn's heart, and a warm light suffused her chest, alleviating her pain and fortifying her breath. "She has opted for love," Jesus declared. "And love wields a power exceeding that of judgment." He then turned to the 4 trembling siblings. "Do not squander the mercy you have been granted." He allowed the words to resonate, deep, weighty, sacred. And in that kitchen, beneath a simple New Mexico sunrise, a family on the brink of self-destruction commenced its tentative journey toward wholeness. 6 months elapsed, and the memory of that night, the night Jesus Christ traversed the Martinez backyard, did not diminish. If anything, its influence spread outward like ripples from a stone cast into tranquil water, transforming all it touched. The dwelling on Sandia Street, once burdened by secrets and an oppressive silence, now thrummed with a quiet energy of renewal. The porch beam, to which Evelyn had been secured, was stripped, sanded, and repainted by neighbors who eagerly offered their assistance. Mrs. Hernandez provided homemade soups twice weekly. Mr. Raymond Cole, the retired mechanic who had previously been too apprehensive to intervene, now checked on Evelyn each evening ensuring her yard lights were illuminated and her doors secured. Guilt had reshaped the neighborhood, but grace had transformed it far more profoundly. Evelyn herself moved with a newfound grace through her days, though her body still bore the faint imprints of the ropes. Her spirit, however, radiated a strength far surpassing its former capacity. She resumed attending church services, lighting candles for her children, praying not for their retribution, but for their inner transformation. And transformation indeed occurred. Robert, who had once been consumed by alcohol and bitterness, had maintained sobriety for 5 months. He arrived every Friday afternoon, leaving envelopes filled with his construction earnings on his mother's kitchen counter. "For what I took," he would murmur softly. He steadfastly refused to enter the house until Evelyn extended a genuine invitation for his return as family, not out of a sense of obligation. He committed himself to extensive overtime, working to reinstate his reputation within the community, offering his services for free, mending fences, and repairing roofs. Initially, residents observed him with cautious skepticism, uncertain. Yet, week after week, he demonstrated his sincerity through humility rather than mere words. Sandra, who had spent years submerged in resentment, evolved into something entirely unexpected: a protector. Witnessing Evelyn's near-fatal ordeal, Sandra recognized the familiar patterns of abuse she herself had once experienced. She began volunteering at a women's shelter, sharing her narrative, and aiding strangers in escaping circumstances they felt too terrified to leave. "I once ignored suffering," she would tell them. "Never again." She visited Evelyn on Sundays, bringing provisions and staying to sweep the porch, the very porch she had once crossed with a gag in her hand. The guilt persisted, but it was now accompanied by a profound sense of purpose. Michael, the architect of the meticulous documentation and insidious plans, enacted the most radical change. He resigned from his position. He severed ties with the law firm that had molded him into a cold, calculating individual. Instead, he joined a non-profit organization dedicated to advocating for the rights of the elderly, employing the very skills he had once weaponized to now safeguard the vulnerable. He confided in no one, but each case he undertook served as a form of atonement. Once a month, he sat in quiet contemplation in Evelyn's kitchen, sipping coffee without uttering a word. She never pressured him to speak. He invariably departed with tears in his eyes. Christine, the youngest and most fragile, blossomed gradually. Therapy empowered her to rediscover her voice. Church provided a foundation for rebuilding her identity. Within Evelyn's unwavering presence, the simple act of being alive instilled courage. She enrolled in social work studies at the community college, driven by a determination to assist families like her own before they reached a point of no return. Her son adored Evelyn and would spend his afternoons drawing pictures in the very yard where his grandmother had narrowly escaped death. The neighborhood bore witness to these transformations, the repentance, the healing. Individuals spoke of the night the light descended, though few dared to label it for what it was: a miracle. Nevertheless, the evidence was irrefutable. Fractured families were reunited after hearing Evelyn's account. Elderly neighbors received more frequent attention. Small gestures of kindness multiplied in subtle, yet profound ways. Even the apple tree in Evelyn's yard, once seemingly brittle and on the verge of death, began to bear fruit out of its season, its branches laden with produce that locals swore possessed a sweetness unmatched by any store-bought variety. Some attributed it to nature, others to mere coincidence. But those who had observed the remnants of Evelyn's rope scars, her remarkable resilience, her profound peace, knew the truth. Grace had taken root on Sandia Street, and like all things touched by the divine, it flourished in unexpected places. 6 months after the miraculous event, the family that had nearly self-destructed was slowly, beautifully, reassembling itself. And the community, once silenced by fear, was learning to embrace courage. 6 months evolved into a year, and the events that transpired on Sandia Street ceased to be confined to the Martinez family alone. Its influence began to spread subtly at first, like a rumor met with disbelief yet undeniable attraction. Before long, Evelyn's survival transcended a private miracle. It ignited a movement that extended far beyond her peeling turquoise fence. It commenced the day a local pastor knocked on her door with a request that would irrevocably alter everything. "Mrs. Martinez," he said gently, "people are approaching me with stories. Stories that began after hearing yours. Families reconciling, elder abuse being reported, children returning to their homes. Your testimony is awakening our community." Evelyn demurred, shy and uncertain. "I'm not a preacher. I'm not a saint." But the pastor smiled. "That is precisely why they listen." Soon, religious leaders, social workers, and even journalists began making visits. Not to venerate her, but to comprehend how a single woman's act of forgiveness had shifted the conscience of an entire neighborhood. It was Christine who first proposed the concept. "Mom, we could start something. A place where people can speak, where no one suffers in isolation." Robert concurred. "We owe the world more. We owe you more." Sandra suggested the name, her voice imbued with emotion. "Evelyn House of Mercy." And Michael, ever the pragmatist, handled the legalities, establishing a non-profit community center dedicated to the protection of the elderly, the healing of fractured families, and the propagation of mercy as a force superior to vengeance. Evelyn House of Mercy officially opened its doors on a cool spring morning, occupying what was once Evelyn's garage. The neighborhood collaborated in its renovation, contributing new paint, donated furnishings, soft lamps, and a long wooden table designed for open and uninhibited conversation. The guiding principle was straightforward. No one shall endure suffering in silence. No one shall confront darkness alone. In its inaugural week, 3 elderly neighbors sought assistance. One was being defrauded of his pension by his son. Another was experiencing neglect from a caregiver. The third simply required a sympathetic ear. The following week, the number of visitors increased. Children arrived seeking to apologize to their parents. Teenagers requested guidance, and exhausted single mothers came in search of solace through prayer. Word of the center's work spread beyond Albuquerque. Church congregations from Santa Fe, Las Cruces, and even Phoenix made arduous journeys to hear Evelyn recount her experience firsthand. However, she consistently refrained from presenting herself as a miraculous figure. When individuals inquired, "How did you endure 3 days out there alone?" Evelyn invariably responded with quiet sincerity, "I was not alone. Jesus Christ stood with me when no one else dared." She delivered this statement without theatricality or exaggeration, and that unfeigned, calm, humble, and unwavering sincerity pierced hearts in a manner that sermons often failed to achieve. Shortly thereafter, a journalist published an article detailing the center's operations. Titled, "From Suffering to Sanctuary, One Woman's Story is Changing a City," the piece went viral. Donations flooded in. Volunteers eagerly signed up. Additional rooms were renovated. The apple tree in the backyard, beneath which Jesus had gently rested her fragile body, became the focal point of a garden where visitors now congregated to pray, weep, and reconcile with loved ones. Even more astonishing were the recounted narratives. A man confessed that he had been planning to institutionalize his mother forcibly, but abandoned the plan after hearing Evelyn speak. A teenage girl was reunited with her estranged father after he discovered Evelyn's testimony online. A hospice nurse claimed to have witnessed a faint luminescence near the apple tree one night, a light that brought comfort to a dying patient in their final moments. Locals referred to it as the Sandia Street revival. Others dubbed it the Mercy Wave. Evelyn, however, gently corrected them. It is not my doing. It is the ripple effect of what Jesus Christ touched. Her children observed these developments with a mixture of humility and gratitude. The very home they had once attempted to seize now served as a sanctuary for countless souls, and the community, once paralyzed by fear and silence, transformed into a place of proactive intervention, compassion, and unwavering courage. This transformation was the direct result of one woman's decision to embrace mercy over bitterness. It was born from the moment Jesus Christ entered a backyard and refused to allow suffering to go unaddressed. Evelyn's brush with death evolved into a living testament, a gift that not only mended a family's brokenness, but also revitalized an entire community. In the years that followed, Evelyn Martinez became a figure the city had never anticipated. A quiet emblem of compassion, a living testament that absolution holds a power greater than any wound. Yet, even emblems eventually tire. As Evelyn approached her late 70s, her physical form began to falter, her strides shortened, her breathing grew fainter, and her hands trembled subtly when she served tea to guests at the Evelyn House of Mercy. She never voiced a single complaint. She simply offered a smile, remarking, "My life has been richer than I ever imagined." Her children now watched over her with a close, protective gaze. Robert saw to it that her roof was repaired before the onset of winter. Sandra made daily visits, assisting with meals and household chores. Michael meticulously managed her prescriptions, double-checking every label. Christine tended to the backyard garden, planting vibrant new blooms and ensuring the apple tree, the very spot where Jesus had once cradled Evelyn, remained encircled by flourishing life. The surrounding neighborhood also took note of her declining energy. They brought comforting casseroles, warm blankets, prayer cards, and shared accounts of the inspiration she had provided. Many simply sought her company, to sit beside her, to hold her hand, to express their gratitude. But Evelyn perceived something invisible to them, a gentle beckoning of her spirit, a growing warmth that felt like a familiar presence murmuring, "Soon." And she embraced it, not with apprehension, but with deep yearning. One evening in late December, an unusual stillness descended upon the outside air. It was the same profound quiet that had permeated the yard the night Jesus had intervened to preserve her life. The apple tree rustled, though no breeze stirred. A faint, ethereal luminescence hovered near the branches, akin to a candle flame flickering somewhere between the earthly and the divine. Within the house, Evelyn lay in bed, awake yet at peace. Christine slept in the armchair beside her. A Bible lay open on the nightstand, turned to Psalm 23. Then Evelyn felt it once more, that familiar warmth, that unmistakable presence. She opened her eyes, and there he stood. Jesus was at the foot of her bed, clad in the same pristine white robe and the same muted beige mantle. His countenance was bathed in a radiance that seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. His eyes conveyed boundless empathy and profound understanding. "Evelyn," he said softly, "you have endured valiantly." A single tear traced a path down her cheek, not of sorrow, but of profound recognition, much like encountering a cherished friend after a long separation. "Lord," she whispered, "is it time?" "Not an ending," he replied gently, "but a commencement." He extended his hand toward her. The room was enveloped by a peace so absolute that even Christine, slumbering beside her, breathed with greater depth, as if soothed by a dream she could not recall. Evelyn slowly, deliberately, reached out and placed her delicate hand into his. In that instant, every ache in her body vanished. Every scar from her past disappeared. Every bruise from her former life melted away like snow under the midday sun. A soft smile graced her lips as she exhaled her final breath, a breath devoid of fear. Within moments, the radiant glow dissipated, leaving the room serene, warm, and hallowed. Christine stirred moments later, sensing a subtle shift. She touched her mother's hand, still warm, and comprehended. "Mom," she murmured through her tears. "He came for you, didn't he?" Outside, the apple tree shivered delicately, releasing petals in the heart of winter, an improbable bloom witnessed by the entire street from their windows. In the days that followed, people gathered. Hundreds attended her memorial service. Stories poured forth, recounting lives transformed, families brought back together, elderly neighbors rescued from neglect. Evelyn's children stood united, finally at peace with one another, embracing the legacy of compassion she had entrusted to them. And as the years unfolded, the Evelyn House of Mercy expanded far beyond its origins on Sandia Street, establishing branches in new cities, new states, and new hearts. Her narrative became a staple of sermons, documentaries, and personal testimonies shared in hushed tones in hospital wards and church basements. Generations would grow up learning of the woman who was left for dead, but lived to save innumerable others, not due to her own inherent strength, but because Jesus Christ entered her suffering and transformed it into a divine purpose. Her influence did not cease with her passing. It resonated through every subsequent act of kindness. Every instance a child forgave a parent, every time a neighbor stepped in to protect someone vulnerable, every time a voice whispered, "Jesus, please help me." Her life served as proof that he always hears, always comes, and always delivers. And he continues to walk among us, subtly, unseen, yet never absent.